Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Comfort Zone, talking shit with King-KAMBUF. We are jumping straight into what might be, and I'm not exaggerating here, the most comprehensive, complex, and politically charged architectural command brief we've ever seen.
That's putting it lightly. We are not talking about isolated structures today, not at all.
No. We're talking about entire integrated systems, continental strategy, and really the very foundation of communal ownership.
That's right. The brief we're digging into today is from the services of KING-KAMBUF PS Architecture Design Studios. It's titled the KAMBUF National Building Design Command Brief and National Projects.
The studio theme of the day for Saturday, November 29, 2025.
And as you said, the scope here.
Yeah.
It's not local. It's not even regional. It's fundamentally global in its ambition.
It is global, but it's also incredibly focused. The theme isn't just, urbanization. It is laser focused on housing and spatial justice corridors for KAMBUF city-states and diaspora sanctuaries.
And that title tells you everything. This is explicitly framed as an exercise in building durable, long-term power through physical infrastructure.
Yeah, through work and order. And the core objective, it's to design systems of housing.
Corridors of dignity is the term they use. And these corridors have to follow four principles that are, well, completely non-negotiable.
Okay, let's unpack these four pillars, because they really tell you everything you need to know about what the studio expects.
So Pillar 1 is a focus on upgrading informal and historically segregated neighborhoods.
And that's the critical starting point, right?
It has to be. It immediately rejects that old top-down colonial model of just clearing slums.
Yeah.
It says investment must prioritize the communities that are already there.
Which means patience, complex legal work, and probably more funding per unit than just building on a fresh plot of land.
For sure. But it's what they call the path of justice.
And the second pillar connects that upgrade to economic opportunity.
Transit-oriented, mixed-income housing spines.
This recognizes that, a beautiful home isn't enough if it's a 3-hour commute from a job.
Exactly. If you're not connected, you're not resilient. So by using major infrastructure like bus rapid transit, they're baking in access to jobs, to education, to everything.
Okay, so what's the third pillar? This one feels like the real muscle.
It is. Community land trusts, co-ops, and anti-eviction policy design. This is the heart of it. This is how you secure what the brief calls sovereign ground.
So it's an instruction to build housing that is basically protected from the market.
Protected from speculation, from gentrification. Because if the housing is brilliant, but the land underneath can be sold off tomorrow to the highest bidder,
the project is a failure.
It fails the justice test. Ownership has to be perpetual, and it has to be collective.
That legal fortress is paramount. And the final pillar sort of rounds it all out.
Public realm stitching. We're talking schools, clinics, markets, worship spaces,
Oh, wow.
all woven right into the housing fabric.
So they're not just designing apartment blocks.
No, they're designing entire, fully functional, resilient communities, built for the long haul.
So if you step back from those four pillars, the guiding philosophy is, well, it's pretty blunt.
It couldn't be clearer. Spatial justice, sovereign ground. If the people of KAMBUF don't own the street, the block, and the corridor, they don't own the future.
That statement just fundamentally rejects any model where people are just renters or consumers.
Yeah, have to be the owners.
Yeah.
And the governors.
Which takes us right to the rotating master challenge focus for today, community co-design.
And this is where things get really interesting. When we talk about architecture, we usually think of, steel and glass.
Mm-hmm.
But this brief insists that the primary structure you have to design is the structure of power itself.
Co-design here means designing with people, not for them.
Right. The brief actually mandates co-produced plans, hands-on design workshops with tenants, with traders, youth, elders.
And it requires setting up legal governance structures like community land trusts before a single shovel hits the ground. Now, here's where it gets really complicated and, frankly, risky for the designers. The core requirement is to explicitly diagram and then redesign the power map of who controls land, rent, and evictions.
Yeah, that is not standard architectural practice.
Not at all.
It forces the architects to be like sociopolitical cartographers. You have to chart the current power nodes, and that includes everyone.
Not just the city council.
No, it means specific landlords, the local police structure, community-based organizations, and yes, it even says you have to map criminal elements or gangs that might be controlling things on the ground.
Mapping those invisible lines of authority seems incredibly dangerous. Why is that step so non-negotiable in the brief?
Because if you don't map the actual political and security reality, your beautiful physical solution will be co-opted or just destroyed immediately.
So if a gang controls access to the block,
Then your shiny new community hall becomes either their fortress or a target. It's that simple. You have to diagram the current reality and then propose a new power map.
a map showing how control of land, rent, and eviction shifts from, say, a predatory landlord to a democratically run community entity.
Like a CLT or a co-op, it's a governance redesign that has to happen first. The architecture follows the power, not the other way around.
The power diagram is the foundation.
Wow. Okay, let's get into the 10 specific case studies that ground all this philosophy.
So the brief starts with 6 schemes in African city-states, and these really show the whole spectrum of challenges. You've got reversing apartheid planning, dealing with explosive informal growth, and confronting immediate climate risk.
And every single solution is a political negotiation expressed in buildings.
That's a perfect way to put it.
All right, scheme 1. It takes us straight into Johannesburg. The focus is on the Corridors of Freedom BRT initiative.
Right, and for anyone who doesn't know, Johannesburg was surgically designed by apartheid to segregate black populations, put them far from economic centers, force these long, expensive commutes.
So the challenge here is to take that car-dominated apartheid grid and turn it into a high-intensity, mixed-income, walkable housing spine. And it has to be backed by strict anti-displacement tools. This design has to explicitly reverse the political geography of the past.
We're talking about a massive increase in density. The deliverables show that. It's large-scale corridor massing, but also really human-scale elements.
Yeah, like the BRT station plaza, a social housing court, a trading edge for vendors, a community hall. You're designing the block and the street.
And the structural mandate here is fascinating. It's not just about building new stuff.
No, it requires retrofitting existing single-story township houses with vertical extensions alongside new, simple concrete and brick walk-up blocks.
So you preserve the existing community fabric while adding density.
That's the idea.
Let's talk about the financial strategy, because this is critical. It calls for inclusionary zoning and land value capture around the BRT stops. Can you just quickly break down what land value capture means here?
Sure. Land value capture, or LVC, is a legal tool. It recognizes that when the public spends billions on a new transit line, the land right next to the stations becomes way more valuable overnight.
And that value wasn't created by the private landowner.
Exactly. It was created by the public investment. So LVC allows the city to capture a portion of that increased value, usually through taxes or levies,
And then redirect that money.
specifically to subsidize the social housing needed to ensure the original residents, the poor residents, can actually afford to stay there. The infrastructure pays for the justice.
So the project's own economic engine is what prevents displacement. That's clever.
It is. And the precedents show this. Johannesburg's existing policy shows that BRT can anchor this kind of mixed-use density.
But there's a big but here.
A huge one. The caution from UN Habitat is the critical counterpoint. They warn that when land values spike and the subsidies are weak, these exact kinds of projects just become engines of gentrification.
The new value pushes rents up and kicks out the very people it was meant to help.
Right. So the design team has to prove, with hard numbers, how their LVC and zoning mechanisms are tough enough to actually stop that from happening.
Okay, moving east to Nairobi for Scheme 2. We're in the Mukuru Special Planning Area, the SPA.
And this is globally recognized. It's one of the most ambitious, rights-based, informal settlement upgrading projects anywhere. The scale is just immense.
The challenge is right in the definition of in situ upgrading. How do you bring in drainage, sewers, power, better housing, street by street, sometimes house by house?
For hundreds of thousands of people without mass eviction.
The pressure to just clear the land and build big towers must be huge.
It's immense, but the mandate flat out rejects that approach.
And the deliverables show that. It's a lane cluster plan at 1.500 year scale, not 1.500, and a housing cluster section that focuses on things like shared stairs. Why is that 1.500 scale so important?
It forces the architect to deal with the granular reality of life in Mukuru. At 1.500, you were designing the shared drainage channel, the exact spot for the water tap, the communal toilet block. It's the human scale of negotiation.
The designs even have to include details for reinforced footing so existing structures can add floors later.
Yeah, it's an incremental density strategy that the residents themselves own and control.
And the implementation here is so heavily reliant on legalizing tenure. Land regularization, replotting, and using resident construction co-ops. That sounds incredibly political.
Oh, it is. It all relies on community enumeration. Basically, you go door to door surveying and recording Who lives where, who has claims to what. That data, backed by law, gives residents the legal standing to fight evictions and participate in the replotting.
And using resident co-ops for the construction?
It ensures the money invested in the upgrade actually stays in the community. It becomes a source of jobs and skills instead of just going to some big outside firm.
So the Makuru SPA itself is the success story here. It's the proof of concept.
It is. But the caution note is a warning from across the continent. These slum upgrading schemes often fail when resettlement becomes necessary and the new sites are miles away from jobs.
Or when the participation is just for show.
Exactly, just ticking a box. The design here has to be so deeply embedded that displacement is basically impossible because the community owns the process from start to finish.
Okay, Scheme 3 takes us to Lagos. And here, the climate crisis flooding, sea level rise, is colliding with massive urbanization right on the edge of the lagoon.
This one is about structural survival. The challenge is to solve a structural engineering problem that is also an eviction problem.
You have to literally lift residents above the flood risk and the eviction risk while keeping their access to the water for their jobs.
And connect them to transit.
Yeah.
You can't just build a seawall and cut them off. You have to integrate with the water, but safely.
Which means the architecture has to be flood resilient from the ground up. The brief calls for concrete or timber piles, a flood-resilient podium as a new ground level, and proper drainage canals.
And the space prompts, like a stilted market deck and a community pier, show that you have to weave the blue economy into that new resilient structure.
This sounds expensive and legally complex.
It is. Implementation requires ironclad anti-eviction bylaws and explicit resettlement guarantees written into the law, not just vague promises. And the financing is a mix of global climate resilience grants plus local land value capture.
So you're turning climate vulnerability into a funding stream for housing justice.
That's the only way it works.
But the history of waterfront development in Lagos is pretty grim.
It's a major warning. Housing rights NGOs there have documented this for years. Waterfront clearance repeatedly pushes low-income residents into even more dangerous areas.
Right.
Developers use the flood risk as an excuse to clear valuable land for luxury condos.
So the new infrastructure, the flood defenses, and the BRT could actually become the engine of displacement if you're not careful.
Exactly. The designer's job is to legally chain the infrastructure to the community, not the speculation market.
All right, Scheme 4 moves us to Accra, specifically the historic Gamashi neighborhood. This adds another layer, cultural heritage.
Yeah, the challenge here is balancing the preservation of deep cultural heritage, securing the livelihoods of the local fishing communities, and protecting them from huge financial pressures like the proposed Marine Drive megaprojects.
This is about protecting intangible capital with physical design.
You got it. The design has to be holistic. A functional fish market, traditional courtyard housing to maintain social structures, lanes for youth businesses, and a sensitive coastal promenade.
And the implementation tools lean on something that's already working there.
They do. They specifically point to models of community-managed funds that are already being used successfully in Gamashi. It proves that local capacity and local money can drive truly inclusive upgrading.
So the success story is that local, community-driven financing works better than some big centralized bureaucracy.
It creates immediate buy-in and accountability. But the caution is the threat from those large-scale commercial schemes. If the legal protections, like heritage overlays, are weak, big waterfront projects will just create elite enclaves and erase the local culture.
The architecture has to be legally strong enough to withstand that commercial pressure.
It has to be a fortress.
Okay, let's round out the African city-states with the last two schemes, which contrast new construction with upgrading existing state-owned housing.
All right, so Scheme 5 is in Kigali, and it's the new build model. The challenge is designing dense, walkable, low-carbon housing on steep hillsides, drawing from the Green City Kigali proposals.
So maximizing sustainability and quality for low to middle income families?
Exactly. And the tools are sophisticated, like progressive land readjustment and green bond financing.
But there's always a gap between the plan and the reality, isn't there?
There is. And the UN Habitat caution is critical here. These formal, affordable schemes, even the green ones, often end up pricing out the truly poor. They get captured by the middle and upper classes, especially in a booming city like Kigali.
The word affordable has to mean something.
It has to be rigorously pegged to the actual income levels of the target group, or the whole thing becomes an unintentional subsidy for the affluent.
And then we pivot to Addis Ababa for Scheme 6, which deals with inner-city Kibele clusters. For our listeners, what exactly are Kibele?
Kibele are basically Legacy inner-city state rental units. They're often dense, sometimes low quality, but they're critically important because they're centrally located and they house these fragile social networks built up over decades.
So the challenge is to upgrade them into cooperative mid-rise blocks without destroying that social glue.
Exactly. It's a battle against the disruption of community ties.
And how do you manage that transition from being a state renter to a cooperative owner?
It takes powerful policy tools. The brief calls for right of return guarantees for all existing residents and implementing things like rent-to-own models.
So your rent payment actually builds equity over time.
Precisely. You transition from being a passive tenant of the state to being an active owner of the community.
And there are lessons from past mistakes in Addis that have to be applied here.
Absolutely. Past relocations where they moved residents to distant condo blocks on the city's edge were a disaster. It caused huge economic stress, long commutes, disconnection from jobs. The brief's lesson is ironclad. In situ upgrading is the only way to go.
If you move the people, you sever the social fabric.
You destroy the community.
That was an incredible survey of the African city-states. Now we make a necessary and, I think, profound pivot. We're shifting focus to the diaspora sanctuaries.
And this is where the global struggle gets connected. The fight for spatial justice here isn't about rapid informalization. It's about the legacy of historic segregation, redlining, and that vicious cycle of gentrification that always follows disinvestment.
We see that the political violence of apartheid spatial planning in Johannesburg has a direct mirror in the economic violence of redlining in West Baltimore.
Exactly. The quest for sovereign ground is a global political imperative for KING-KAMBUF.
Scheme 7 takes us to Salvador-Bahia, an Afro-Brazilian majority city. We're looking at hillside favela-type settlements.
And the challenge here is uniquely complex. You have to combine structural upgrading on these steep slopes with deep cultural preservation. You're protecting sacred spaces like the torero, the cultural yards.
All while ensuring access to the blue economy and fighting against racialized displacement from tourism?
Yeah, it's a lot. The design has to be pragmatic about physics. The deliverables call for slope-stabilizing retaining walls and stair systems and micro-piers to connect communities back to the water.
So it's engineering, architecture, and cultural protection all rolled into one.
And the implementation tools are powerful legal mechanisms from Brazilian urban law. You have ZIS-style social interest zoning, community land trusts, and cultural heritage districts.
Okay, you've got to elaborate on ZIS and zoning. That sounds highly specialized.
It is. ZIS stands for Zonas Espécies de Interest Social, special zones of social interest. It's a critical tool in Brazil. Essentially, the city council legally designates an area, usually an informal settlement, as a zone where the primary legally protected interest is social housing.
So it overrides speculative market forces.
Completely. It guarantees the land is reserved for the poor, prevents eviction, and mandates public investment. It is a legal fortress built right into the city's master plan.
That sounds like a radical tool for housing justice.
It is. But the caution is necessary. Gentrification and tourism in Salvador have a history of displacing Afro-Brazilian communities when those protections were weak or politically undermined. So the ZEIS zoning has to have teeth, and it has to be backed by a CLT.
Okay, now we cross to the United States. West Baltimore, a textbook case of a historically redlined and systematically disinvested corridor.
The site itself is defined by the legacy of state-sanctioned racism in finance and infrastructure. So the challenge is restoration and revival.
Specifically, a Black-led housing and Main Street revival, anchored by transit and, centrally, the Community Land Trust for Permanent Anti-Displacement.
This isn't just about building new houses. It's about restoring generations of lost ownership equity.
Let's take a moment to really define the CLT for our listeners, since it's central to all these diaspora schemes. What does a CLT do that traditional affordable housing can't?
A community land trust is a nonprofit. Its core function is to acquire and hold land forever for the benefit of the community. So when a home is sold on CLT land, the CLT keeps ownership of the land itself.
So the homeowner owns the building, but the community owns the ground beneath it. What does that achieve?
It does two crucial things. First, it separates the costs. Since you're not buying the land, the cost of the home drops dramatically, making it affordable for low-income buyers. But more critically, the CLT's lease agreement limits the resale price.
So you can't just flip it for a huge profit.
Exactly. It ensures the house stays perpetually affordable for the next low-income buyer. It effectively pulls the land out of the speculative market forever. It's the ultimate anti-gentrification tool.
And the design reflects that structure, retrofitting row houses, infilling empty lots, creating CLT-owned housing and black business storefronts.
And the metrics are about justice, not just units. Households secured under the CLT. Commercial spaces for local owners.
The success precedent, Dudley Street in Boston, proved this model can work. But the caution for West Baltimore is a stark reminder.
It is. It reminds us that infrastructure without justice just deepens the harm. Building a new light rail line by itself is not enough. If you don't secure the land with a CLT first, that transit line will just accelerate gentrification and push everyone out.
Moving across the Atlantic to London, Scheme 9 focuses on Brixton and Peckham, historic African-Caribbean hubs facing just intense gentrification.
The challenge here is, how do you lock in long-term black diaspora presence in one of the most expensive property markets on the planet? The design has to be incredibly economically ingenious.
The details show that. Planning for CLT flats, shared workshops, cultural venues, possibly using lightweight timber infill above existing buildings to add density without massive demolition.
And the implementation tools have to be aggressive. Community right-to-buy policies, social value procurement that prioritizes local labor, and crucial anti-vacancy penalties to stop speculators from just sitting on empty buildings.
You have to attack the financial incentives directly.
You have to.
And the caution here about estate regeneration is very strong.
Because estate regeneration in London has historically been a Trojan horse. It often means demolishing social housing, promising to rebuild, but the new housing is rarely for the original residents. It displaces long-term black and minority communities.
So the brief demands that the design must add security and density without displacing a single resident.
The whole thing hinges on the strength of that anti-eviction legal framework.
Finally, we land in Kingston, Jamaica, and the intimate scale of inner-city yard communities. This is where housing, security, and poverty all intersect.
The goal here is profoundly humanitarian. How do you turn these fearful, underserviced yards into safe, serviced multifamily courts without criminalizing the residents or triggering speculation?
The design is really rooted in the existing social structure. Shared kitchens, microshops, play courts, worship corners.
And the physical details are about safety. Secure but permeable fencing, much better lighting to reduce violence.
Implementation here relies on an integrated approach. It's not just about buildings.
No, it's based on models like the Inner City Basic Services for the Poor. It involves tenure regularization, giving residents formal rights to their land community policing partnerships to build trust, and microfinance to build economic capacity.
So you can't just fix the plumbing.
Exactly. The caution note says it all. Upgrading the infrastructure without also providing livelihood and governance reforms just risks making the area a target for later gentrification.
Economic security and physical security have to be built at the same time.
Concurrently, for it to be sustainable.
We've just spanned 10 schemes across 3 continents, all united by this philosophy of spatial justice. Now let's shift to the methods and tools. The brief mandates, the operating system for this entire national project.
This is the section that confirms this studio isn't just an architectural practice. It's being mandated to be a governance design firm, a political organization.
The success of the physical design is subordinate to the political and economic mechanism that keeps it alive.
That's it, exactly.
So the brief mandates deep research into 5 theme-level anchor precedents. These seem like pretty disparate documents. Why are these 5 non-negotiables?
Because together, they address the 5 core bottlenecks that doom pro-poor housing projects all over the world. Land tenure, political participation, sustainable finance, climate integration, and integrated services. You have to understand these 5 failure modes to design something that lasts.
Okay, let's start with UN Habitat's affordable land and housing in Africa.
That's the textbook. It's the foundational analysis of the land, tenure, and finance bottlenecks at a continental scale. It mandates that any design solution must have a viable, large-scale financial model behind it. No magical thinking.
Next, Mukuru SPA in Nairobi. We talked about the site, but why is the process itself a mandatory precedent?
Mukuru is the flagship case for participatory planning in a massive informal settlement. It shows the painstaking political and social work required. The enumeration, the block-by-block negotiation, the rights-based approach. If a designer proposes a quick fix without understanding the time and community work of Mukuru, they fail the political mandate.
Then we have the Gamashi community-managed funds in Accra.
This proves that grassroots finance works. It shows that small, decentralized local grants, relying on local bricklayers and carpenters, can drive more inclusive upgrading than big government contractors. It's an anti-bureaucratic success story.
The fourth is the Green City Kigali framework.
That's the benchmark for climate resilience and low-carbon design in an African context. It pushes the studio to move beyond just affordable materials and integrate modern concepts like low-carbon concrete and sustainable water management, no matter the site.
So climate justice is integrated into social justice.
Has to be. And finally, the inner city basic services for the poor in Kingston. That's the template for integrated upgrading. It proves you can't solve housing in isolation. You have to simultaneously address water, sanitation, electricity, and safety. The design has to be a holistic package of services, not just four walls and a roof.
This next section feels like the moment of truth. The focus on co-design, the power diagramming. It's a demand for political intervention.
Absolutely. Task 1 is drawing that system justice diagram. This is where the theory meets the messy, dangerous reality. It forces the studio to identify every node of power. The council, the landlords, the informal utility providers, even the black market.
What happens when the design reveals that, say, a local criminal element controls sanitation or safety on the block? How is an architect supposed to solve that?
The architect doesn't solve the crime problem, but they have to design the governance structure that disempowers that criminal node by replacing the service they provide.
So if a gang provides informal security,
the design must mandate a community policing partnership and a secure lighting network. If a landlord provides exploitative rental units, the design replaces that with CLT-owned secure tenure. The diagram is a roadmap for transferring sovereign control to the community.
And after mapping that political landscape, the brief mandates quantifying justice, using metrics that challenge every traditional planning KPI.
This is a radical political contract. I mean, look at these metrics. Household secured, displacement allowed, target 0, share of units community owned, rent ranges versus median income.
That displacement allowed, target 0, is the most aggressive one. Why is that specific metric so non-negotiable?
Because it acknowledges that in the history of urban renewal, displacement is not a side effect. It's often the mechanism for profitable development.
It's the point.
It's the point. By setting the target at 0, the brief says that if a development is beautiful, green, dense, financially vital, but it evicts one legitimate long-term resident, it is a catastrophic failure of the justice mandate. It forces the designer to prioritize the political contract over everything else.
And measuring rent ranges against median income makes sure affordability isn't just a smokescreen.
Exactly. Affordable is meaningless without context. By pegging the rent to the actual median income of the local residents, the team has to prove their financial model works for the people who are actually living there right now.
So we move to the final block of work, which is about locking all these high-level justice concepts into the tangible, physical, and legal reality of the construction.
This is where governance becomes physical. It's a requirement to think like a detail-oriented contractor and a corporate lawyer at the same time. You're producing detailed plans, but also key structural and governance details that make the project impossible to undermine later.
Give me an example of a structural detail that locks in justice.
Okay, think about the requirement for a shared stair and sanitation core for incremental housing. In a place like Mukuru, building up vertically is key. By mandating a shared, structurally sound core from day one, the design pre-wires collective ownership and management of that infrastructure. It structurally encourages future cooperation.
And a legal detail. What about the requirement for a ground floor lease diagram showing the separation of CLT units from private commercial units?
That is the critical financial security mechanism. The ground floor of a building on a transit corridor is where the value is generated. Retail, services, commerce. By diagramming that lease arrangement legally, you ensure that the revenue from that commercial space flows to the CLT or the co-op to the community and not to a private developer.
And that revenue then subsidizes the social housing units above,
making the whole neighborhood economically self-sustaining and perpetually affordable. The architecture itself generates the revenue that defends the people.
That is the goal.
And finally, that required a metadata field. Lessons learned. This mandates reflection. Designers have to explicitly write down conclusions like CLT plus BRT station equals long-term black land control.
Or in situ upgrading beats relocation in preserving social capital.
It ensures every scheme explicitly articulates the link between policy, governance, and physical form.
So what this entire command brief establishes, at the end of the day, is that the design of the built environment is completely inseparable from the design of governance and the mandate of perpetual sovereign ownership.
That's it. The architecture, in this context, isn't about aesthetics or just shelter. It becomes a permanent treaty of survival, codified in steel and concrete, protecting the community from the market and from history.
We started this deep dive into the KAMBUF National Building Design Command Brief with the idea that architecture must build power. We've gone through 10 intricate sites across 3 continents, from flood-proofing Lagos and securing tenure in Mukuru to reversing redlining in Baltimore and fighting gentrification in Brixton.
And the unifying thread across every single site, whether it's an African city-state or a diaspora sanctuary, is the battle against displacement. It's all rooted in the philosophy that community ownership of land is the foundation for sovereignty.
The tools, CLTs, land value capture, ZIS zoning, they're tailored locally, but the goal is always universal: secure the ground for the people.
And the final directive from KING-KAMBUF just sums it all up. It moves beyond construction to this profound commitment. Land is law. Housing is a covenant.
It's a permanent commitment to the people who live there, not a structure to be built, rented, and sold for profit.
Which brings us right back to the 3 non-negotiable questions that every single design in this project has to answer. And these are the questions you should be asking about your own city's planning decisions.
1. Who stays?
2. Who owns?
And 3. Who decides what gets built next?
If you, the listener, look at the development happening in your neighborhood right now, ask those 3 questions. Does it answer them affirmatively for the existing community? Or does it strategically avoid them to serve outside interests?
Because according to this command brief, that is the difference between building a commodity and building a nation. The closing command is clear, urgent, and visionary. Lock in justice on the ground and the skyline will follow. Design the corridor, secure the people, expand the nation.